Ever been in that position where you said everything you needed to, yet walked away feeling like you'd lost somehow? You know that feeling, the knot in your throat, as if each word pushed you further from your own power. Maybe you're surrounded by people who talk over you, interrupt constantly, mock your ideas, and fill rooms with their arrogance disguised as confidence. Perhaps deep down you've believed that staying quiet means you're weak, that not defending yourself is surrender, that not reacting means losing. But what if all of that is just an illusion? What if true power has never resided in words but in their absence? Nietzsche, one of history's most misunderstood thinkers, recognized something few have the courage to admit. Those who talk too much reveal too much, and those who feel compelled to convince others are already at a disadvantage. The world teaches you that you must fight, explain yourself, defend your ideas, as if every conversation is a battle for truth. But nature suggests a different path, something more subtle, more lethal, and infinitely more intelligent. Nietzsche believed silence isn't merely the absence of noise, but an overwhelming presence. Silence disconcerts people. It destabilizes them. It forces others to confront themselves. This is for you who constantly feels ignored or overshadowed, for you who leaves conversations feeling unheard, for you who's tired of being the easy target, the nice one, the peacekeeper, while others take advantage of your calm demeanor. Maybe you've confused your silence with submission. Today I'll show you that silence can be your most powerful weapon, and that true victory doesn't come from winning arguments, but from never needing to enter them. Get ready to see silence differently, not as an absence of response, but as the definitive response. The fear behind our need to respond. Why do we feel such a need to respond, to rebut, to correct, to prove ourselves right? Because we've been conditioned to believe truth must be defended tooth and nail, that remaining silent means letting others win. But Nietzsche saw this as a symptom of our deepest weakness, the fear of appearing weak. And behind this fear lies the ego, a fragile construct that can't tolerate being questioned, that confuses disagreement with attack, turning every conversation into a battlefield. Nietzsche noted that most people don't seek truth when arguing, they seek power. They want to reaffirm their beliefs, not because these beliefs are solid, but because if they're shaken, everything crumbles. Argumentation, in this sense, isn't a tool of wisdom. It's defensive armor, a desperate cry from the ego to maintain control of the narrative. What does this mean for you? When you feel compelled to justify yourself or prove your point, you've already entered their game and lost. The very need to justify your position shows you're still trapped in the desire to be accepted, validated, understood. Nietzsche called this herd morality, the behavior of those living under others' expectations, those wanting to be seen as good, correct, just. But this quest for approval is exactly what keeps you weak. True strength, Nietzsche said, isn't in convincing others, but in not needing to. It lies in holding your vision even when faced with laughter, criticism, or rejection. It's in being misunderstood and remaining unshaken. What he proposes is power measured not in verbal victories, but in internal mastery. Power that comes from staying calm while everyone around you loses control. Power that grows when you stop reacting. If you truly want to win, understand this: the game of discussion is theater, and the first to stand up and act has already lost. Nietzsche knew the reactive mind is a subjugated mind. The observing mind, that's the dangerous one, because it transcends the need to prove anything. But if we shouldn't react, how do we exert power? If words betray us, how do we make others feel our strength without saying anything? Nietzsche had an answer, found in his ideal of the Übermensch, the being who transcends common morality's limitations and dominates through absolute self-control. The Übermensch, silence as dominance. Nietzsche didn't write for the weak. He wrote for the few brave enough to look within, confront their own misery, and transform it into strength. For him, the common human lives trapped by conventions, moralism, and the need for applause. But there exists another type of being, rare, dangerous, free. The Übermensch doesn't live by reacting to the world. He shapes the world in his image, and perhaps most impressive, he often does this in complete silence. The Übermensch doesn't need to win debates. He doesn't engage in cheap emotional games. He observes. He understands. He carefully chooses when to speak, and more importantly, when to remain silent. He's understood something others ignore. Silence is a form of language, a language that doesn't try to convince, it imposes presence. The Übermensch's silence isn't empty. It's a threat. It's authority. It's the sound of self-mastery. While others shout, he commands respect with his gaze. While others explain, he observes and reveals others' weaknesses merely with his calm. His silence is a wall. Those on the other side despair, trying to guess what lies behind it. In that despair, they make mistakes, reveal too much, lose balance. This silence isn't passivity. It's absolute control of one's energy. It's strategic economy. The Übermensch knows every spoken word is a revealed move. Every emotional reaction exposes a weak point. That's why he stays quiet. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he doesn't need to say anything. He's transcended the need to prove himself. His presence speaks for him. More than that, it disturbs others because his silence forces them to look within, to deal with their own noise. In a noisy society, those who master silence are kings. Nietzsche saw the Übermensch as someone who creates his own values, rules, morality. He doesn't depend on anyone's validation. That's why he's feared, because nothing destabilizes people more than someone who can't be manipulated by guilt, fear, or the need for acceptance. His silence is the shield against all these mechanisms. And when he speaks, it's because his words will topple empire. But this raises a question. What makes silence so unsettling for others? Why do so many feel threatened when someone simply chooses not to react? What happens in the human mind when expected confrontation is replaced by overwhelming absence? The answer lies in psychology. The psychology of silence, a mirror to the soul. Silence isn't just sounds absence. It's a mirror, and what it reflects is, for many, unbearable. When you choose not to react, you aren't just silencing yourself. You're forcing the other person to hear their own voice, to confront their arguments without the comfort of external resistance. And that destabilizes them. Because most people don't speak to express themselves. They speak to protect themselves, to convince themselves, to hide the emptiness between what they say and who they are. When you remain silent, their disguise falls away. Social psychology has shown that in confrontational situations, silence is perceived as judgment. It doesn't matter if you're just listening, the speaker begins to feel exposed, insecure. Why? Without your response, they lose control of the narrative. The human brain goes into alert. The amygdala, the fear and anxiety region, activates. The other person projects their fears onto you. Is he judging me? Did he notice my insecurity? Does he know I'm bluffing? In this psychological battlefield, silence acts like an invisible blade. It cuts where no one sees but everyone feels. Nietzsche sensed this long before modern psychology confirmed it. For him, average people live as slaves to their reactions. They act on impulse, react out of vanity, speak from fear of being forgotten. The superior spirit, the one who masters themselves, remains silent because they know every word is a piece handed to the enemy, every emotional reaction an involuntary scream revealing where to attack. Moreover, silence has a devastating effect on manipulators. People who thrive on emotional control depend on reactions to stay in the game. When you don't react, you break the cycle. The manipulator panics. They need your response to validate their position. Without it, they lose themselves, reveal themselves, show the weakness they've tried to hide. But there's something deeper. Silence triggers unresolved pains. It activates traumas of rejection, abandonment, humiliation. Because suddenly the other person realizes they're not the center, that their words aren't enough, that their presence doesn't impact you. This is intolerable for the narcissistic ego. When you remain silent, you're not just defending yourself, you're attacking where it hurts most, at the center of their illusion. This is why silence requires strength. It's uncomfortable not just for others, but for you too. It goes against everything you've been taught, against the impulse to react, justify yourself, explain. But that's precisely why it's powerful. Because it demands mastery. And mastery is true power. Now that you understand how silence operates in others' minds, how it activates insecurities, breaks defenses, unmasks postures, it's time to go further. To stop being just an observer and become someone who uses this strength intentionally, strategically, transforming silence into a weapon. The time has come to stop merely understanding silence is power and start using it. Knowledge without practice is just dead theory. From now on, you'll learn to transform your silence into a precision weapon. No longer a defensive shield, but a sharp blade ready to cut through others' masks when they least expect it. The first step is simple yet brutal. Be silent when your will screams for a response. This requires strength, because everything in you will want to react, justify yourself, prove you're right. But that desire is poison. Every time you give in, you reveal you're still under others' control, that you still care what they think, that you're still playing their game. True silence is born only when you kill that need. When you understand you owe nothing to anyone. That truth doesn't need to be spoken to exist. The second weapon of silence is observation. While others talk, get lost in explanations, try to fill the void with words, you listen. But not as someone waiting their turn to speak. You listen like a hunter listening to prey's footsteps in the forest. You perceive fears hidden between lines, subtle contradictions, insecurities disguised as arrogance. You store all this because when you speak, if you speak, it will be surgical, with the precision of someone who masters the other's emotional territory. The third weapon, time. Learn to let silence last. The pause is an element of tension, and tension is power. While the other speaks, waiting for your reaction, and it doesn't come, they experience internal collapse. Discomfort grows. Their mind fills the void with assumptions, fears, paranoia. A simple look accompanied by silence can impact more than 10 well-formulated sentences. The fourth weapon, unpredictability. When you master silence, you become unpredictable. And the unpredictable is always feared, because people don't know what to expect from you. When they don't know what to expect, they lose advantage. They become cautious, measuring every word. You invert interactions' logic from reactive. You become the conversation's gravitational center. At this point, silence isn't absence. It's pure dominance. But be careful. Don't confuse silence with passivity. Nietzsche never advocated weakness. The silence we're talking about is active, tense, charged with intention. You're not withholding, you're preparing, choosing, positioning yourself with strength that doesn't need display to be felt. And when the right moment comes, when silence has already said everything needed, you can speak a single sentence, a precise comment that ends the discussion. Not because it was louder, but because it was truer, deeper, more undeniable. But this brings us to a more delicate issue. So far we've talked about using silence to win. But there are moments when the game isn't just about winning, it's about emotionally surviving. There are situations where people aren't just debating with you. They're using you, manipulating you, draining you. And you, without realizing, are giving away your power every day. You're being dominated without a word needing to be spoken. That's where this journey's darkest point comes in, when silence is no longer strategy, but a silent scream from someone who's lost control of their life. The trap of false silence. Is there anything more perverse than being silenced? It's being conditioned to think silence is your only option. That swallowing anger, conceding in discussions, avoiding conflict at all costs, equals maturity. That remaining silent shows balance. But what if this is a trap? What if many times this silence isn't wisdom but disguised submission? Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. What you call peace is often just your domesticated surrender. Have you noticed how some people take advantage of your calmness, your ability to listen, to overlook, to avoid confrontation? They push their ideas, impose their wills, occupy your spaces, and you let them. You convince yourself it's not worth fighting, that it's better to maintain harmony, that it's not a big deal. But the truth, you're paying a very high price for this false peace. And worse, you're being used by those who understand you'll never react. Nietzsche spoke of the morality of slaves, that value system constructed by the weak to survive in a world dominated by the strong. It's the morality of resignation, of guilt, of being nice, an invisible code teaching you to nullify yourself, diminish yourself, conform, and still feel virtuous for it. But Nietzsche didn't write for those who resign themselves. He wrote for those who dare break these chains, for those who realize they're being used and decide to stop participating in their own submission. When you accept this type of silence, the one that swallows you from within, you surrender your power without realizing it. You're shaped by others' expectations. You're no longer yourself, but what others need you to be. This is the opposite of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Because true will to power isn't shouting or dominating others. It's dominating yourself. It's regaining control of your narrative. It's being silent not because you're afraid, but because you owe nothing to anyone. This silence of submission needs to die. In its place must be born the silence of presence. The one that doesn't bend, doesn't humiliate, doesn't apologize for existing. The one that stands amid chaos and without saying a word changes the situation's course. This is the silence Nietzsche would respect, the silence of someone who has become their own master. But how do you reach this level? How do you move from being manipulated to being master of your presence? How do you kill the herd morality within you and be reborn as someone who imposes authority even when silent? The answer lies in the most powerful figure of Nietzsche's philosophy, the Übermensch. We've talked about him. Now it's time to understand how to become one. Becoming the master of silence. We've reached the final point. Now I need you to understand one thing with complete clarity. Silence isn't absence. It isn't emptiness. It isn't space between sentences. True silence is pure presence. It's mastery. It's the sign you're no longer reacting to the world. You're shaping it with your mere existence. Nietzsche never wrote for those content to survive. He wrote for those who want to transcend, for those willing to tear off society's imposed masks, even when it hurts. The Übermensch's silence isn't the silence of the oppressed or the coward. It's the warrior's silence, one who has already won before battle begins. It's the stillness of someone who no longer needs to prove anything because he knows who he is, and more importantly, what he deserves. Now look at your life. How many times have you remained silent out of fear, guilt, or not wanting to disturb? How many times have you let others decide for you, speak for you, trample your truth? Enough, Nietzsche would say. Living this way offends existence itself. Accepting this kind of silence betrays yourself. From today, your silence needs to change its tone. It needs to stop being escape and become an invisible shout of authority. A boundary, an affirmation of who you are, even if no one understands. Because who you are doesn't need understanding. It needs living. And that requires courage.
Do you have that courage?
Then comment below. I choose the silence that commands respect. Not just so I know you made it this far, but so you can publicly affirm this choice, this commitment to yourself. Because words have power even when they speak about silence. And don't stop here. The next video is essential. It will expand what you've learned and take your mind further. Watch it not for me, but because you deserve to go beyond. Remember, the weak shout, the strong remain silent, the wise choose when. In the symphony of existence, your silence can be the most commanding note, not an absence of sound, but the presence of power too profound for words to capture. Friedrich Nietzsche.